there are a lot of lovely faces here in the boxes on the screen. I'm going to start with introduction, and we are also going to ask all of our students, prospective and admitted and deposited students, to introduce themselves as well. So I'll kick it off and just say, my name is Dr. Stephanie Kruzmark. I serve as the Vice President of Enrollment Management at Iliff, and I've been here since last June. I'm looking forward to us opening campus this fall so I can see everyone on the screen in person soon. With that said, I'm going to kick it off or hand the baton over to our president, Reverend Dr. Tom Wolf.
Thank you, Stephanie. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. It's good to see some faces I know. Hi, Zephyr. How are you? Good to see you. I met Zephyr on an airline, and one day, and we just talked all the way there, and it was just wonderful. So good to see you. I'll say more later, but just as to who I am, I graduated from seminary about 40 years ago, and had made a career. I thought I was going to make a career exclusively in the church, in the parish, which I loved. And then I was asked to take on the chaplaincy at Syracuse University. And there was something about that just excited me. And then all of a sudden that whole environment energized me. So I decided to cast my lot inside of higher education, and have served as a dean of a chapel and head of student affairs at Syracuse. And then Iliff called, and I'll say more about why Iliff attracted me, but it's an innovative space, and it's very progressive in its view, and I just fell in love with the idea of spending part of my career in life at Iliff. So I'll say more later, but how are we doing this, Stephanie? Am I passing it on to somebody, or are you directing traffic?
I'm happy to direct traffic, and I'll pass it on to Boyoung.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Boyoung Lee, which is a Korean name. It means treasure by the water. So as a Christian, I claim the first psalm is all about me. I am serving here at Iliff as the Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs and Dean of the Faculty, also Professor of Practical Theology, but people generally call me Dean Lee or, Dean Boyoung, but I prefer Boyoung. And so I oversee all the, everything related to academic affairs, and work with the faculty and your curriculum and courses and adjunct and all that area. And I am an ordained United Methodist clergy. So I'm, as I said, my name is Korean name, and I am from Korea. And so I came to United States because I couldn't say yes to God, to the ordained ministry that I had a sense of a call since I was very little, like 13 years old. But at the time in Korea, as a woman, I couldn't say yes to God. So that itself put me in a very different trajectory, that fighting for justice for all. And also I chose to become a United Methodist because of its theological stance on a universalist anthropology that God loves everyone no matter what. And I served the churches in Korea and USA and different states, but along the way I found the love for study. So I became an academic, and so I'm here, and this is my 5th year as the dean at Iliff, and it's a great place to be. So welcome.
Thank you, Boyoung. I'm going to pass it over to Reverend Dr. Kathy Kelsey.
Good morning. I go by Kathy or Dr. Kelsey or Professor Kelsey. I'm most comfortable with Kathy because virtually all of our Iliff students are in one way or another becoming my colleagues. And I figure we might as well get started with that sooner rather than later. I'm also a United Methodist clergy person. I went straight through college and seminary and served as the lead pastor in United Methodist congregations in Michigan for 8 years. before I heard a refinement on my calling and realized that the real joy for me in ministry was in teaching. And so I went back to school to earn a doctorate so that I could teach, and have been at Iliff doing with a foot in both worlds, with a foot in the performing religiously and helping a community come together as dean of the chapel. And then the other half of my responsibilities at Iliff are actual teaching, and I teach the required United Methodist courses. Although I've worked closely, particularly in spiritual formation, with UUA clergy in the area, with United Church of Christ, with disciples. So I'm not narrowly doctrinally defined. Instead, the best of Methodism, I think, is welcoming of truth and faithfulness wherever we find it. And that's part of, I think, why Iliff has become as diverse as it now is. So I look forward to meeting some of you, and it's great to see Adam again. Adam and I had met online last week.
Thank you, Kathy. I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Jeremy Garber.
Morning, folks. My name is Jeremy Garber. I came to Iliff in 2006 to do my PhD in theology and popular culture, which was my way of watching movies and reading comic books and getting a PhD. And liked it so much, I've been here ever since. So I helped start Iliff's Academic Advising Center in 2010. And now I'm the coordinator of the Academic Advising Center and also direct the Writing Center. So I'd be here both to help you with your career goals and getting the classes that you want, but also to help you sharpen and hone your writing, whatever your level is. So welcome.
Thank you. I'm going to pass it on to my daily colleagues, starting with Brother Daniel Clay Witter.
Thank you, Dr. Grusmark. Hey, everybody. Good morning. Brother Daniel Clay Witter. I've been an admissions counselor, admissions representative here at Iliff for the last 6.5 years. And I'm also an alum of the school. So I graduated in 2002 with my MDiv with a Justice and Peace Studies concentration from Iliff. And quite naturally, after graduation, I then spent the next 12 years as a labor union and faith-based community organizer in Colorado, working mostly on like workers' rights and immigrant rights campaigns. And I'm also a 21-year professed religious brother in the Ecumenical Order of St. Luke, thus the little BR dot in front of my name. And I see admissions work as part of my ministry. It really feels like that at Iliff. So utterly delighted that you are all able to join us today. Thanks.
Thank you, Brother Daniel. And Alexandra, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. I'm Alexander Ravenscroft. I am the odd duck out, and then I graduated from Naropa and then came to Iliff. I am your admissions rep. So for a bunch of you, if I have been pestering you, I'm on the other end of that email. Other than that, I do a lot of activist work and have done a lot of activist work in the LGBT community. And I am ordained in a Norse pagan tradition called Foreign Theater of America, where we routinely help LGBT community and fight white supremacy.
Thank you, Alexandra. And I saved one of the most important people for last, and that is our Director of Financial Aid, Mrs. Goldie Ector.
Hello. My name is Goldie Ector. I'm your friendly neighborhood financial aid director. I've been here with Iliff for 2 years. This will be my 3rd year. I'm here to make your financial process and paying for school as easy as possible. So I don't bite. If you need anything, just let me know. And I hope that this is a good experience for you.
Thank you, Goldie. Well, now I'm really delighted to turn it over to all of our prospective and future students. And I will start with Zephyr. It looks like you're next on the screen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Zephyr, and I'm actually Naropa as well. So hello. I discovered Tibetan Buddhism when I was like 18. There was a monastery where I grew up in Northern California, and so sort of went on that path, and then went to school later in life, came to Boulder for Naropa to continue my Buddhist study, and I am hoping to look into chaplaincy at a hospital. So that's my path, hopefully. Well, you never know.
Thank you, Zephyr. And Marius, it looks like you may be driving. So I wanted to try to give you a little pre-warning if you need to pull over to introduce yourself.
Thank you so much. So I'm Marius Malan, and yes, I am driving. I'm from South Africa. I'm in Vanderbijl Park in South Africa. It's evening at us, so we're actually driving home from our parents. I've been a pastor for the last about 20 years. We did a startup church about 10 years back, myself and my wife, moved to the Vaal, and yeah, that's I have a wife and I have 2 kids. They're also with me in the car at the moment, and I'm looking to just further my studies, to maybe do a M in leadership or in theology, just to get the next step going for me in my process.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us, you and your family. We are really appreciative of the time.
Thank you.
Amy, please introduce yourself.
I'm Amy Livers. I am from Little Rock, Arkansas. I have 3 kids, 2 of whom have already made I have not been United Methodist very long. I've been calling to ministry for about 3 years. I grew up Baptist, Anglican for about a decade, and then recently I am looking at starting my div to become an elder, and have not ruled out the possibility of actually continuing on to get a PhD. And that's where I'm at. I'm starting the back to school thing and trying to figure out how to juggle school and being a wife and mom and working and doing all the things.
Thank you for joining us, Amy, and finding this time out of your busy schedule. We're delighted that you were able to join us. Okay. Zane Johnson, you're next on my screen. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Zane. I just recently completed my master's in English literature, for which I studied some religious poets, some English religious poets of the 17th century, and found myself more interested in the religious aspects of the writing than the literature itself, and found myself a couple weeks ago moving across the street from the Iliff school. So figured, divine may be up to something here. So yeah, just curious to learn more about the program and see if maybe religious studies is the next step in my academic career.
Thank you for joining us today, Zane. We welcome you to come on over to campus when we fully reopen this fall in September. Looking forward to it. Julie, if you just joined us, I wanted to welcome you. Oh, well, maybe she'll come back. I just wanted to let her know we were doing introductions. But with that said, next on my screen is Roberto. Roberto, please introduce yourself.
Hola, buenos dias, everybody. I'm Roberto Ochoa. I am the Associate for Congregations of Color and Ethnic Identified Congregations for the National Setting of the United Church of Christ, coming in from Worcester, Massachusetts. I have my Master of Divinity from Andover Newton Theological School, and interested in exploring the D-Min program as well as one of the reasons why I'm interested in ILF is I would love to study under Reverend Dr. Miguel de la Torre as I focus on my areas, congregational stability and congregational growth and stability among ethnic identified congregations. And I'm glad to be here with everybody.
Roberto, we're delighted that you're here to join us as well. And Reverend Dr. Eric Smith will be joining us fairly shortly, and you'll get a chance to take a sample class with him as well and talk more about the DMIN program. Next on my screen is Adam. Adam, please introduce yourself.
Good morning. My name is Adam Rosner. I just want to thank all the staff and everyone from Iliff for being here this morning for us. I live in Lakewood, Colorado, and I'm currently in the Koreatown portion of LA in a hotel room helping a friend recover from surgery. But I live
That's
in Lakewood.
That's the food in entire country.
Oh, you're not kidding. I kind of don't want to leave. But as far as Iliff goes, I've attended one semester at Colorado Christian University and was looking for more of a challenge. And lo and behold, I've been accepted at Iliff, and I'm really excited to start school there in September. I don't exactly know where it's leading, and I don't have much of a history in spirituality. It's just that something in the last few years that I've been directed towards and being called to. And so I'm really excited to see where this leads. I do have several different interests in the LGBT, in prison ministry, and in recovery, as I'm a recovering addict. So I'm really looking forward to see where all this leads, and I'm happy to be here, and it's nice to meet everyone.
Adam, we're happy that you're here, and thank you for the gratitude. We're grateful that you are here as well. Wesley, I hope you can hear us, and if you have access to a camera, we would love to meet you.
Hi, sorry, I'm at work at the moment, but I'm Wesley. I grew up in Germany overseas on a military base, and I'm very interested in pursuing the Masters of Social Justice and Ethics. Yeah, I mean, right now I'm living in Aurora, so really enjoying Colorado.
Fantastic. Well, Wesley, thank you for joining us, and thank you for finding some time while you're working. And we appreciate that multitasking skill set. You'll need it for sure at Iliff. And lo and behold, Reverend Dr. Eric Smith, thank you for joining us early. Would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Eric Smith. I teach New Testament and early Christianity here at the Iliff School of Theology. I'm actually sitting at Iliff this morning in a conference room. So get a very boring view of the campus. I also direct the Doctor of Ministry program. I co-direct that actually at this point. And I'm an Iliff alum. I did my PhD at Iliff I graduated about 8 years ago. So I've been around for a while, really love the place, and I'm really eager to meet all of you.
Fantastic. Well, this is a very lively crowd this morning. That's fantastic. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to Tom and Boy Young to talk a little bit more about why Iliff. I'm sure you all were drawn to Iliff for one reason or another, and curious to learn a little bit more about why they chose Iliff and why we believe that Iliff is the place for you. So with that said, I'll turn it back over to Tom and Boy Young.
Thank you, Stephanie. Every time I hear people introduce themselves, it just reminds me over and over again, every single time, that we have that people come with these great, rich experiences from their life that somehow led them to a place like Iliff. Zane, I'm just chuckling when you were introducing yourself into getting a Master's of English Literature. My wife has a Master's of English Literature, and then she ended up in seminary as well. So welcome to that club. And those of you may have heard me say this before, but I think it's always relevant in some fashion or another. Just the idea of what brings people here is, I always call it, that you have this something you see, something that's curious, something that gets inside of you, and you can't get rid of it. You just can't. You got to process it. You've got to express it somehow. And And so that's what brings everybody to Iliff. Iliff is a collection of people with what I like to call the interruption story. You were settled into a career, a life, you thought you knew what you were doing, and then you found yourself turning in a direction because you were listening to this. It's your conscience speaking, it's your commitment speaking, it's a lot of voices that are calling to you. And so we welcome you in that story and the experience that you bring with you. I always say this, bring your experience with you in the door. Don't come to Iliff because you think you're going to become, you sort of have to leave your past behind and become something altogether new. Oh, you'll become new, all right. You will. But remember to bring yourself in the door, because the experience that people have in the world before they even get to Iliff is a rich part of the fabric of our institution. And what happens in classrooms and online together and in social events and between times all happens because of what you're processing and what you're becoming new, but what you brought with you. So please do not check your identity at the door. Bring it with you. It is part of our diversity. It is part of our commitment to the world. And those voices are really, really important. And when I hear, I'm not sure what I want to do with this. Good. Don't be sure. Come and discover. It will find you as much as you find it. It just happens that way because you put yourself in an environment that will surround you with those kind of things. Theological education is in the middle of a huge transformation. There was a time when theological schools prepared people for parish ministry. That was what their job was. That's not our job anymore. It is partly our job. We don't dismiss parish ministry. In fact, we embrace it. But we're embracing it at a new level. We're embracing it for the changes that need to take place in it, because Protestantism, mainline Protestantism, is all rapidly shifting, changing. The culture's demanding different things of it. And so we're in the middle of all that. We're in the middle of identifying, articulating, preparing students for that. So those of you who are interested in parish ministry of some kind or a more traditional ministry, that's our commitment to you, that not to prepare you for something old, but to prepare you for the transition and the preparation for something very new. But what else is being called for from theological education is a very rich engagement with the world in different ways. So we have created an Artificial Intelligence Institute. We have created an Eco-Justice Center. And we have created an Institute for Religion, Politics, and Culture to build new cohort relationships throughout and to express the values that we have at Iliff in new ways with new communities of people. We're preparing to teach DEI training for attorneys and for accountants and for new communities. We are in the process of engaging environmental organizations, huge, large environmental organizations like the Sierra Club and others, who have come to realize that one of the things they don't see in their work in saving the environment is they don't see the people who get crushed by environmental policy. They don't see the racism in it. We feel called as an institution to name that and work with that. And artificial intelligence is generally still created by white engineers in one part of the world, carrying with them all of their own biases and so forth. So we are actually learning how to create and consult with how to make artificial intelligence bias aware, bias aware. And so yes, we engage a lot of our traditional communities, which are becoming new formed communities, but we're also engaging whole new communities of people because they are looking for what Iliff has to offer. And that's an exciting expansion that we are going through right now that I think the world is really calling us to do and to be. So you're coming into the mix of all of this. You're coming into this time of transition in the world and in the theological education. And so you get a front row seat to all of the new kinds of initiatives that we are creating, that and many more. Perhaps Kathy can talk when she presents today. Maybe you won't have time for this, but I just want to say the Ministry Incubator, which is a gathering of people who are looking for new models and so of community organizing and so on. So, and how we do congregational life now. Those are things that we value tremendously, and we seek to be honest about being inclusive, and we know that that's an ongoing lifetime work, and no institution's perfect at it. We're not perfect at it, but we are very intentional, and we ask our community to be intentional. And there will be times, then I'll stop, but there will be times where in the course that we ask our students to embrace for the year, where our students deal with their privilege. You feel it. Good. Because something in you is working hard, and that's transformative. And we don't apologize for those uncomfortable moments, but we will stand with you always in them. But when you have them, please take a pause. Think about the communities that you will serve one day. Picture them in your mind. And then take a breath and walk closer to that image, and thus closer to yourself and closer to those feelings, because the people that you serve in the days to come are people who are going to need you to have done this work. They need you to see them, and they need to be able to trust you. And so that's a hallmark of who we are as an institution. So welcome to Iliff, and we're glad you're here today. And you will enrich our life together. We will. Thank you. Hoi Young.
Thank you, Tom. I cannot agree more with what Tom said. So I am one of the living proofs of constant discerning. And in my earlier introduction, I said I had to leave Korea to say yes to God's calling that I felt. So I started doing this theological studies in the United States because I wanted to be an ordained pastor, coming from activist background. And so Korea's a democratization movement that I thought it was important for a woman leader to be ordained and have voices there. And then I'm still here, right? So it's because I didn't have any fixed determination, but I want to be open to God's calling. And it says, so some of you said, you don't know what exactly, but you sensed what Tom called it a disruption moment. And I think that will continue, and God will constantly disrupting your life with important moments. And so I'm still in that process, even though people see me as the dean of the theological school and she's there established, but I'm still discerning. And that's one of the reasons why I'm at Iliff. So before Iliff, I was a local church pastor, and then I was a seminary professor in Northern California. So Jeffer, Tom also is very familiar with that area because he went to seminary there where I taught. And then South Africa, Pretoria University that I have been visiting association there, and Koreatown where I did my master's in Southern California, Worcester, Massachusetts. I served the churches in Massachusetts and Connecticut. So Highway 90 and 84 was my routine area, and Worcester shopping mall outlet was my go-to place for clothing shopping, all that. So a lot of connections that the people bring here, which means that world is very small. And so the seminary that I was teaching in Northern California is as progressive as Iliff, and I was very happy and thriving there. But when Iliff called me, I didn't hesitate because as I discerning about my career vocational call from the divine for on a regular basis. What's my calling? So when I was in PhD program, if I get to teach, I counted social justice committed schools that I want to be affiliated with. I counted 3 schools. So I did my master's in one of them, and I was so blessed to be teaching at the other school. And then third school left, that was Iliff. So I was paying attention to Iliff, especially under President Tom Wolf's leadership, because as many theological schools are in crisis with the dwindling congregation, mainline congregation, and all these statistics, and Iliff was one of those schools. But a lot of those schools go down once they hit the bottom, and then the sinkhole. But Iliff was one of those, almost non-existing school that bounced back and then leading new trend, that new thought leading in theological studies, that not only we bring theology to old and usual familiar mainline congregation, but the theology has so much to offer. Think about politics of our country. Religion, especially misunderstood Christianity, is just shaping our politics. But people, in the name of the separation of a church and state, they don't bring theology to their work. And often highly educated people have a very problematic theological interpretation of the word. And that's what's what happened on January 6th and all that. So Iliff's commission is not only how do we educate the people who are traditionally called to ministry context, but how do we transform the word with the theological perspectives that is coupled with new needs of our work. That so theology becomes a foundation of people's daily life perspectives, but also we can make sense of what's going on with the theology. So that's what we try to do through Artificial Intelligence Institute and EcoJust Center and the Institute for Religion Politics. But that's, you can say, oh, those are special initiatives, but what we are trying to do at Iliff is how do we change our own culture to embody that, so students not only learn from our faculty through the contents that we teach, but also through our relationships among ourselves and or our relationship with you. So at Iliff, this is one of the 13 United Methodist theological schools in the country. And so it was, originally founded to educate United Methodist clergy. But right now, about 1/3 of our students are not Christians. And we are one of the few theological schools that require classes other than Christianity, that your own religion. So we have a faculty who teach Tibetan Buddhism, Hinduism, East Asian religions. And also, we have a Master of Pastoral Care, Pastoral and Spiritual Care program that is a training program, very highly respected program to train chaplains, but we are known for intercultural and interreligious training of chaplains. So what we hope is that not only you learn about other religions or those things, but our classroom itself, being at Iliff, is become a lab for you to experience the word itself in our classroom, so that when you go to your work areas, okay, I learned this at seminary, now it's time for me to practice. But what we hope is that you practice what you want to be in your classroom in Iliff. So that's what our faculty is trying to do. So to do that, our faculty for the last 2 years, these are very cutting edge social justice oriented, committed colleagues like, Roberto, like Professor Miguel de la Torre. But all of our faculty went through 2 years of a mandatory diversity training. And we are extremely familiar with the critical race theory and critical whiteness studies, race in anti-racist theories. But we went through that training to embody that in our own relationships, so that our not only explicit curriculum that what we teach, but our implicit curriculum is permeated in our relationships, so that you can learn from our own relationships, our culture. So we try to create a culture of humility here, that we never master somebody else's culture, but we always bring critical reflections on who we are, to embody that humility, to learn and to understand the others who are different from us, and then create anti-racist culture among ourselves. So that's our commitment. And also, another 1/3 of our students are members of LGBTQIA+ communities. And so even though United Methodist is in very problematic stage over human sexuality, but Iliff is not apologetic in terms of a full inclusion. There is no person who is excluded from anything. So that is our very critical commitment, anti-racist, human sexuality, that the justice for all. And our staff also went through, not only faculty, but you engage with the staff. So our staff went through their own year-long training, mandatory training, and they're taking initiatives, have a regular meeting to reflect together on their anti-racist practice. And plus our board, who oversees all of our work, they volunteered to go through anti-racist racism training by among themselves. So they finished the year-long training, and now, as I listened to board conversations, they are also talking about how do we continue this in our own relationship and what are our next steps. So everywhere at Iliff, that's a commitment that out of which we not only teach what we want to teach from very progressive perspectives, but also how do we embody that culture, so that transform the culture is teaching all of us, that is also permeated into our society. That's our goal, and that's how our curriculum is designed. So I'm hoping that you get to have a chance to experience those teachings and cultures among yourselves, and also as Tom said earlier, that always questioning. And so when you come to any of the Iliff classes, you not only learn what's important, but you will be asked by our faculty, so what does it mean to you in your own context? Because we don't want you to just repeat what we teach you, but you should be a theologian yourselves. So you should be able to translate, interpret whatever going on in the world from theological perspectives. So we always challenge you to bring your own context as equally important the text as a written text. And we do that because theology is a contextual work, but also traditionally theological textbooks have been very much shaped by Western white heteronormative cisgender perspectives. So then if we just perpetuate the status quo. So we invite you to bring your own experiences, lived experiences as a text, so that we will challenge you to think about what you learn in your own context, and then bring your experiences to challenge the text itself too, so that we can create something together. So these are some of the ways that we engage here, and I hope that you will be ready to be challenged, and also to challenge us, so that we become better instructors and colleagues and institutions. And as Kathy said, we do this because you are our future colleagues. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Tom and Boyoung. Kathy, I wonder, since Tom already mentioned the Ministry Incubator, if you would be willing to say a few words.
Sure, I'm always willing to talk about the incubator.
Thank you, Kathy.
Pardon?
I said thank you.
The Ministry Incubator at Iliff came into being in part because as we looked at what Iliff graduates were doing, we realized that we already had a significant number of alumni who were innovating, as in creating new models for serving and being in creating not just religious communities, but creating communities of change and communities for personal growth, but also for civic change. And that gave us, at least some of us, kind of paused and said, okay, so how are we doing that? And how could we foster it even further? Well, by spring of 2019, the United Methodist Church had made it really clear that its imagination for who could be in ministry and what ministry would look like had gotten pretty stuck in a narrow slot that looks like the way congregations have looked for the last 100 years or so. And so the Ministry Incubator at Iliff was started in order to invite people who had an idea for really a passion for a people and a vague idea of how to respond to those people and support them, help them be who they could be in the world. I'm being vague because the kinds of projects have varied a lot between associates in the incubator. And the purpose of the incubator is to bring folks who are exploring or beginning to act on that new idea and that new community and bring them together for mutual support and for practical assistance with resources from the school, specifically resources from the library and resources in the program called Resource that has short trainings on finances and community organizing and other practical aspects of beginning a new entity. And we've leveraged that so that some of our associates are United Methodist and most of them are not. We've leveraged the appointment process within Methodism and other calling processes for other denominations. So we're intentionally creating a space that's on the margins of what the historic religious organizations could imagine, so that if they can't do it institutionally, individuals still have what they need in order to follow the calling on their hearts, and perhaps even to help the imagination of existing religious organizations to be able to see other possibilities that they will be able to move into over the coming years and decades. But instead of waiting for the institutions to provide the support, we're creating a community of support together. So it sounds vague. That's because it's changing with the needs and the passions of the associates who are a part of it.
Thank you so much, Professor Kelsey. We really appreciate all your work. And thank you for sharing more about the Ministry Incubator on the spot. With that said, we're in a period of transition. We'll be joined by one additional Iliff faculty member, and Dean Lee will moderate a question and answer session really about some what should I say, top of mind, relevant questions of how graduate theological education shows up in this day and time, and get their thoughts and words of wisdom. Before we do that, I wanted to ask our esteemed president, Tom, if you had any additional parting words of wisdom. I know you take time out of your busy schedule to join us for these wonderful events.
So it's just my privilege. I love hearing your stories. I love the interaction already, and you're in for a fun day and a meaningful day. And I just wish you well with it. And again, welcome to Iliff. And let us know what we can do and what you need. Please, you are surrounded by wonderful people, and you're going to experience more of that today. So enjoy the day, and I wish you all the best, and stay well, please. Stay well. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you, Tom. And before we begin our faculty Q&A panel, I actually have a brief homework assignment for each of you in the moment. In just a second, in the chat feature, you're going to see a link to a form. This form is going to allow you to select your sample class for today, as well as your 2 student success breakout sessions. I did want to thank 2 folks that already filled out the form, and just wanted to encourage you to revisit the form because some of our sample classes have been updated for today. They'll be taught by Reverend Dr. Eric Smith and Reverend Dr. Carrie Doring. So with that said, with a click of a button, you should all see a fairly long chat, but most importantly is the highlighted link that will bring you to the form to select your sample class and your student success sessions. So while we transition or get ready to transition to the faculty panel, if everyone could complete that form in the next few minutes, that would be great. I should say everyone excluding Kathy, Boyoung, Eric, Goldie, Alexandra, and Daniel.
I want to go to Carrie Doring's class. How does that work?
Thank you. I can already see the live results coming in. So thank you, everyone, for taking time to select your choices. Okay, I think, let me double check. It looks like everyone has responded. Don't feel rushed if you still need some time to make your selections. Okay. I believe Dr. Doring should be joining us here in the next few minutes, but I also don't want to delay. Let's see, looks like there's a little chat from Kathy. Oh, great. Oh, yes, Katie, thank you for joining us on your way to the airport. Katie, in fact, I don't want to put you off guard, but if you would like to introduce yourself, we would love to hear where you're logging in from, what program you might be looking at, and why Iliff. Oh. Okay. No worries. May not be a good time right now to talk on the phone. Okay, and just as I mentioned her name, Reverend Dr. Carrie Doring is going to be logging in here. Welcome. So with that said, I'm going to pass the baton back to Reverend Dr. Dean Lee.
Thank you. Thank you. So Dr. Kelsey, Kathy Kelsey, who introduced herself earlier, Dr. Eric Smith, and Dr. Carrie Doring. But even though, two of you already introduced yourself, for the purpose of this panel, and also some of our prospective students joined a little later. So I invite you to introduce who you are and the program you direct or some courses that you teach. Dr. Doring, Carrie, go first.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Carrie Doring, and I teach spiritual care at Iliff to community faith leaders and also those interested in chaplaincy. So I teach our basic course in pastoral and spiritual care, and I also teach courses on post-traumatic stress and moral stress.
Thank you. And in fact, she's very humble. That she's one of the leading scholars of what's something called the moral injury. So people who have to do things that violate their own moral system, and then afterwards, that it's different from PTSD, but living with the thinking, I violated my own values. So she is one of the key leading scholars, shaped the discourse. And right now she's teaching New York Presbyterian Hospital health workers who let go of so many COVID-19 patients and that deceased people and their family. And so she's helping them to cope with their moral injury. Dr. Eric Smith, say more about, you also work at a church too.
I do. Hello again, everyone. I'm ordained in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, and that denomination has sort of ecumenical partnership agreement with the United Church of Christ. And so for about 14 years now, I have been on the staff of a medium-sized UCC church here in the Denver area, where I work with the youth group and I preach about once a month and do some adult classes and things like that, which I find a really rewarding kind of complement to the work at Iliff. I find that there's often a lot of overlap and a lot of mutually life-giving things there. Right now, my favorite class to teach right now is my Intro to the New Testament class. I just recently revised that class, and I've taught it twice since I revised it, and I'm finding it really a lot of fun. So, the field of biblical studies generally for a long time has been concerned with sort of uncovering origins, and it has sort of assumed that the task of reading the Bible critically is to get back to some original text and to figure out what it was that the historical Jesus said or did, or what the text really said before it got corrupted by human hands or something like that. These sort of very theologically grounded assumptions. And so I've reorganized the course to kind of interrogate that and actually to interrogate it in light of, as we were talking earlier, in light of things like critical race theory. So it's interesting the parallels that pop up between racialization and scripturalization, the ways that the search for an original in the biblical text can be paralleled to, for example, sort of a eugenic sensibility about how human lineages work. So there's this book by Eugene Lin, who teaches, I think, at Yale, that helps us do that. And so I've found so far that reorienting the course around that has been really thought-provoking for myself and for students, and I'm really enjoying that. Some of the other courses I teach a couple of exegesis for preaching classes on Matthew and John. I have a course on early Jewish Christian relations. I teach a course called Queering Early Christianity that takes queer theory and looks at the early Christian traditions and texts through that lens. And so I really enjoy teaching these courses that come out of my interactions with students and the interest that students bring to Iliff. I find that I learn a lot from those, and that's where most of the energy, at least for me in my classes, comes from. So it's good to be with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Kathy, you're not only Dean of Chapel and Spiritual Formation, but also Spiritual Director. You're one of the few theologians I know of that chair the board of ordained ministry that approve people's ordination. And so you have other, also you are one of the very respected Schleiermacher scholar in the world that you didn't mention.
No, there are too many things. I am sometimes call myself a utility player. And so I've done a lot of different kinds of things. But I only have a half-time teaching, a little bit more than a half-time teaching load at Iliff in order to do the Dean of the Chapel work. And so right now I'm teaching Life of Prayer this summer. That course is designed to use a student's own experience of regularly engaging in contemplative practice in one of 5 different kind of channels or traditions of contemplation. And Zephyr, I use the Christian definitions of contemplation and meditation. So contemplation in Christianity is the emptying of thought. More like meditation is, the word meditation is often used in Buddhist traditions or Eastern traditions. The East and the West flip those 2 terms in terms of what they refer to. So I invite students into a discernment process and learning, and then learning through, not reading about, but actually engaging in the practice of prayer or contemplation. And then we're coming to the end of the term, and students teach the practice and that they've been using, and then do a final reflection paper that looks back over journal entries that they've made to help them identify what they've learned from their own practice. So that's very intentionally not a head course, but an engagement, and then pause to reflect, particularly at the end kind of course. I've taught authentic engagement, which Carrie Doring and Dr. Albert Hernandez and Dr. Edward Antonio designed as specific and unique thematic from Iliff that we, Carrie can say more about how it came into being, but the course itself helps students identify our own values and the relationship of the way we're living to our own values, and then thinks about ourselves and our relationship to others, and then our relationship to the whole through a process of thinking about values and lived experience. Those are the courses that I teach that anybody at Iliff is likely to take. And then I teach United Methodist history, United Methodist doctrine, and United Methodist polity. So I get to know the students who are preparing for ordination in the United Methodist Church really well. But I bring that same kind of teaching sensibility. In the history course, my contention is you can't understand the historical documents of the Methodist movement if you haven't actually experienced some of its key practices. In particular, being a part of a weekly accountability group, engaging in some prayer practices that aren't unique to Methodism, but that are particular to the founder, John Wesley, and engaging in self-reflection and journaling. Those are key practices that helped animate both lay people and clergy in the Methodist movement. And so the course has those components alongside actually reading original documents and accounts of the 250 years of United Methodist history. And the purpose of that is to help students be able to find their own voice and their own ability to have, to see things in context, inquire about context, but also to interrogate the claims that we ourselves make and the claims that others make about what the golden age was of Christianity and particularly of Methodism.
Thank you so much, all 3 of you. So I want us to talk about a little more, world view of a theological education. Each of you expressed what you teach and how you teach a little bit. But as we all living through, we live in living through a very crisis moment of human history, that which is repeat, I guess, but also very politically divided, contentious, and the gaps of haves and have-nots, and neoliberalism and capitalism, all this oppression, especially racism, and then homophobia transphobia in our world. So in this very divided, troubled world, why theological education or studying theology matter to you? Why do you do this?
I guess I could start. I think a lot of people explore a theological education as a way of discerning what's meaningful for them in their vocation, like what would be the purpose of their work. I got into studies from ministry. I was heading on a path towards becoming a music teacher, but then when I did practice teaching, I realized it didn't quite capture the sense of vocation I have for doing something that was both meaningful and that I thought I was good at. So then when I kind of almost accidentally stumbled into ministry by first deciding that theological studies were compelling for me, I realized that creating meaning each week in a community through preparing a sermon, worship, walking with people on their paths, especially around death and birth, that part of being a community faith leader was very compelling, as was spiritual care. And so then I was, through my theological education, really drawn towards a path of becoming a community faith leader. So I think a lot of people pursue a theological education because they're trying to discern a meaningful vocation.
Thank you. Eric, Kathy, why theological education matter in this world?
This summer, I've been teaching an independent study around pandemics and Eucharist, which is, a very kind of narrow thing to ask about. But we have a couple of doctor of ministry students who are in communities where it's become a really interesting question. What do you do with this ritual that requires a lot of close contact with other human beings when this is not maybe the moment to do that? And it's been interesting in that class as sort of a narrowly focused example of what I think goes on in a bigger sense in theological education, which is that the past has all these resources for us. My own fields of biblical studies and history are full of these resources that come down to us from the people who have come before us. And it's interesting to just notice the ways that those resources can be really helpful in facing some of these challenges that we have today. We talked earlier about Iliff's AI Institute, which might not seem to have very much at all to do with theological education, but it turns out, theological studies and the study of religion has a lot of really important things to say to this thing that's really new in the history of the world, this artificial intelligence. Turns out there's things that are useful there. So that's one of the things I really love about theological education is just the endless applicability of it, that the past can speak to us in the present and into the future in ways that give us life and give us ways to live.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. We have a colleague, Philip Butler, who's published a book called The Black Post-Human Artificial Intelligence System. So he's looking at like a artificial, even like a sensor camera, police camera, whose skin tone it captures, all that, the biases, and then he's interpreting that through a theological anthropological lens, especially putting anti-Blackness at the center of his work. And the other day, Kathy and I were in the same restroom, and so I was able to get soap out of those automatic sensor, and then she couldn't. She tried. I said, maybe this is designed by Asian people, so at the Asian skin tone It's the standard, not white or white skin tone. So those things, it's all very theological matter, anthropology matter, right? Even small things like that. So Kathy, why theology matters?
Well, I could have, I second what both Carrie and Eric have said, to let me add yet a third perspective. As I think about the various fields of study that exist in the academy and that exist as professions and skill sets in the world, most of those are pretty, and have to be pretty, in order to make progress or improve, pretty focused on one normative theory or understanding that pretty much everybody shares, and things move forward by building on that theory. But the study of religion is one of the places in our human world in which we're still relatively accepting of the fact that there are going to be a lot of different religious traditions and perspectives. And we may be utterly convinced that the one we're in is correct. But when we come to study religion, we have the opportunity of discovering what can be learned through multiplicity rather than through singular focus. And I think that's why diversity and equity and inclusion work is so easily fits with theological work, because we already have a sense of the multiplicity of the human experience and the multiple ways in which folks express deep meaning. And so we can learn from the interfaces between those, and we can learn to see ourselves in the world differently by seeing ourselves alongside and our own worldview alongside other world views and ways of being in the world, without having to be combative about that, as in the political landscape that we're in right at the moment. I think that's a huge gift and opens possibilities into the future that the possibilities aren't found in quite the same way.
Thank you. So let me be a little more specific with the next question. So you all three are ordained Christian clergy teaching at a theological school, but committed to social justice and diversity and inclusion. And then you also teach in three distinctive areas of sub-disciplines of theological studies. And that's a fact. And another fact is that, as I said earlier to our students, that we have about 1/3 of our students who are not Christians. And then about 1/3 of our students identifying as themselves as LGBTQIA+ members. So given this diversity of our students, given our school's commitment, your training, your commitment that is aligned with the school's commitment, and then what's going on in this world, the troubled world, what foundational knowledge in your own classes with this diversity in your classroom that you are helping our students to do this work in a larger context? In other words, how do you teach given this diversity in your classroom and also the world that they are connected to? And give us some concrete examples from your teaching. Good examples or failed examples that transformed you as a teacher.
Dean Lee, I think it's interesting, as you were describing us, you said that we're all three Christian clergy, but we also value inclusion and diversity. And I think that's part of the root of the thing here, is that coming from one tradition, especially a tradition like Christianity, that has not always valued diversity and inclusion and does not always value it, which is what makes that but possible there. That's what's so valuable about theological education, I think, is that it asks you to look beyond yourself and your own history and your own, the traditions in which you are embedded, and to find other ways of viewing the world. And in my own teaching and learning in early Christianity, I think even within the Christian tradition, early Christianity provides lots and lots of opportunities to look beyond. I belong to a particular denomination that has its origins on the American frontier in the 17 and 1800s, which of course is a really complicated and sort of problematic time in the history of the world, where my whole tradition's roots are sunk into this settler colonial project, right? And so it would be very difficult for me to read my own tradition and think that that's sufficient. So in the study of the history of Christianity, or in the study of our sacred text, I think there's opportunities, to see how other people have read these same texts and read them very, very differently in very different contexts. And that, speaks into my own tradition. It's not about learning someone else's tradition, not just about that. It's also about understanding yourself and where you come from better, and seeing yourself in a bigger picture.
Thank you. Do you have some concrete examples that how that is manifested in your class, or you are challenged by students? Your some of the best teaching and learning moments in your own classrooms as a teacher?
Yeah, I thought you might notice that I left that part out.
I don't leave anything out.
I know. One of the interesting things, say for example, in a New Testament introduction class, is when students realize the degree to which they have blended 4 different gospel accounts into one account, for example. And we sort of, those who have come up in the Christian tradition, sort of have a single way to think about the story of Jesus's life, where what the Bible provides us is 4 different ways to think, at least 4 different ways to think about Jesus's life. So for example, in every Christmas pageant you've ever been to, there's shepherds and wise men, and they're hanging out there together, where that doesn't appear in any biblical text. And the donkey, by the way, that Mary rides comes from a non-canonical proto-evangelion of James that somehow makes its way into our pageants too. So just that process of thinking about, why is it that I tell the story this way when my sacred text tells it these ways? And there's 100 other examples just in the New Testament of how that works. Just that process of thinking about, why is it that I think this thing when my tradition tells me these things? That I think is really, really valuable. And it shows up in that kind of way again and again in the classes we teach here.
Thank you. Carrie?
Yeah, in my courses, it's similar to, I think, how both Kathy and Eric teach, by beginning with always bringing our own life experience into dialogue with how we're learning. We focus each week on trying to find and use our own calming practices, because there's a lot of research on how the particular ways that spiritual care helps people is by helping them experience a sense of spiritual trust. And so we try to experience that with and among ourselves by finding practices that help us trust the process of learning. Starting a graduate degree program is very stressful. It includes a lot of different kinds of stresses, but particularly academic stress. Like, will I belong to this community? I'm sure everyone listening is experiencing that question, as you're imagining being part of Iliff. And then, am I smart enough? And those questions about, am I smart enough, are shaped so much by aspects of our identity, our social class, our gender, our racial identity. So we're trying to find and use a calming practice. And I always introduce and use just deep, slow breathing that fosters a sense of self-compassion. So once we're grounded and can keep returning to a practice that calms us, It helps us trust the process of learning, trust our discernment that we're in the right place, that we're pursuing a path that's meaningful for us, and helps us learn from each other. The two components that make spiritual care really distinct from other kinds of care are the use of spiritual practices that calm us, and then exploring values that give us purpose and meanings to understand suffering. So we do that work for ourselves and with each other while we learn how to do it for and with others. And one of the joys of teaching at Iliff is this pervasive value within the community of, I would say, spiritual humility, that the particular practices and values and purpose that are meaningful for each of us. Some of those are shared, some of those are different, but there's a tremendous amount of respect for those differences. And that's a value across Iliff that students will experience in every single course. And that really is, as both Kathy and Eric have said, really enriches our learning, because one of the things that research on sociology of religion is telling us is that more and more people are finding their own path of what's meaningful for them. And often they're combining practices and values and beliefs from across their life experience, so that each person is unique in how they experience a sense of trust in the world and goodness, and how they find meaning. And that's one of the values that I think really enhances learning at Iliff.
Thank you, Carrie. Kathy, you already articulated, what you teach, how you teach. Do you have anything that you would like to add to what you said?
I'll try and be brief. That when I teach United Methodist doctrine, which would sound like it's a narrow course, I very intentionally have students every week reading both an original source, and there are 4 or 5 different interpretations on that doctrinal point from United Methodists, so that it becomes clear in our conversations with each other that there's not a normative interpretation, even within a tradition that says we're all going to stand on the theology that, as John Wesley articulated it in his sermons and as it's articulated in our articles of religion. So I'm very intentional about creating a space in which my interpretation is not normative, and in which one of the people we're reading is not normative. And part of what that does, in partial response to your question, Roberto, about how we engage the tension between differences that students may experience between each other, is to create an environment in which there isn't one normative stance. And therefore, we rather than judging others on whether or not they are sufficiently close to the normative stance, we get to be curious about the differences and about the different ways that we have come to experience the world and the varieties of deep meaning that we've created out of our own experiences. And I think that learning to live comfortably in that kind of environment is one of the most important learnings that we foster at Iliff.
Thank you. So thank you for addressing Roberta's question. So Carrie, you teach human sexuality and spiritual care, and Eric, you enjoy the teaching, Curing the Bible, early Christianity. So how do you deal with this tension, and also not only this over human sexuality, but also race and different religions that our students bring to?
Well, in teaching online, which by the way I love, my favorite courses are hybrid courses, because I think in discussion forums and online classes, we just have a chance to really dive deep into how each student is responding to the topic of the week and the examples or the case studies we're using. So we try to, in the spiritual care classes, really model spiritual respect for each other in our responses, both to the discussion forums and when we're in person together. So we're trying to listen deeply for how others might have values or beliefs that are different from our own. It's very easy to look for similarities. That tends to be our kind of default mode, particularly in spiritual care, to assume people are more like us than different from us. And we're also looking at how stress, both personal stress and cultural stress, generates emotions that then give rise to people holding on to certain values and beliefs. And there's a lot of really interesting research around how fear, anger, guilt, shame, disgust can cause people to hold on to values that help them cope with stress. And particularly around sexuality and sexual orientation, the progressive traditions in religions that would tend to be more inclusive of sexual orientations, diversity of sexual orientations, tend to hold on to values around the body and purity and freedom and care of others that are different from more conserving traditions. We try to use a lot of this research, especially how values become more rigidly held when people are experiencing intense emotions, to understand why someone's beliefs would be different from our own. And one thing I find is that, particularly in spiritual care classes, the overarching value of care for others, do no harm, tends to create a lot of room for difference and a willingness to listen to those who are different. So we try to bring that spiritual care orientation of listening, spiritual humility, respect for difference to our conversations with each other.
Thank you. If I may add, I have this 3C principle: confirmation, contradiction, and continuity. So no matter how disagree, students sometimes make obnoxious accusations sometimes in the classroom, even in very progressive school like Iliff, I need to confirm where they are. And then I try to bring contradictory side of the same story. And then the continuity is that helping with lots of care conversation, that helping students to see that this contradiction and is part of this larger picture, the continuity. Nothing is not an orthodox thing. And so it's one class I taught feminist theologies, but I intentionally chose 100% of my readings from Global South. All of my readings were from authors from Africa, Asia, and South America. And even to our very progressive students at Iliff, there were just eye-opening experiences that already, the concerned women theologians of a circle of African theologians in Africa who published 40-some books already together as a community that have been doing cutting-edge work that was not introduced in US classrooms, that ahead of us in many of these topics. So, and I try to bring, many of our colleagues bring our students into that fish, take a fish out of a water experience. Eric, your last comments?
I noticed that Roberto in the chat mentioned the colonial impact of scripture, and I think that's important. In my Queering Early Christianity class, we have kind of a little unit on tomb stories, And tomb stories are often really, they're commonly used as coming out narratives, as sort of mirrors to read a coming out story in. And it's interesting to kind of juxtapose some different readings with that reading. And so we read a little article about the story of Lazarus by Siona Havea, or Havia, I think is how you say it, a Pacific
It's
Islander scholar.
Tongan scholar, yeah.
Who kind of tells the story of how a group of prisoners read the story of Lazarus as as almost, Jesus is almost betraying Lazarus by delaying, coming to his aid. And then we read that alongside a piece about the Gerasene demoniac by Eric Thomas, who's an African-American Christian who reads it, who reads it, as this, almost as a parable of the way that colonial impact has twisted, our standards of what's okay in terms of sexuality, what the body is for. And he reads, that story of coming out of that tomb as a way to critique the role of colonialism. So to me, sometimes just putting these things next to each other and saying, look, these can mean, all these things can mean at the same time, and they can mean beside each other and mean together, is a really valuable exercise. And I really enjoy kind of letting students draw their own conclusions from those juxtapositions.
Similarly, when I teach decolonizing Bible studies, I put 7 different interpretations of the Exodus. Some are contradictory, right? The Exodus story interpreted by a Palestinian scholar, Native American scholar, there's an opposite to liberation theology. It's a Black liberation theology, Korean Minjung, Latin American liberation theologies, and Asian women's interpretations. So I asked them, so what's the truth here? And what is your interpretation? And so how do you create justice not at the cost of somebody else's? So that's some of the things that we do at Iliff. And having Stephanie on screen means that we need to wrap this discussion. So thank you, colleagues.
Yes, thank you so much. Can I see or hear a round of applause for our faculty? Thank you. I hope that our prospective or future students found this discussion rich and inviting, and hopefully it will motivate you to want to continue to move forward in your process here at Iliff.